Welcome to the Narrative Mindset Podcast. This is, believe it or not, this is episode number 78. And I've done a lot of episodes, and I decided to do kind of a rebirth, I guess you would call it. So I'm doing this because I'm taking a different direction as far as the podcast is concerned. I'm ignoring what most people ignore and going with the true path to creativity. And the true path to creativity is to ignore what people normally think. You have to ignore what people usually think. Because usually when people start a podcast, the first thing, or not even a podcast, anything, they always think about what everybody's going to think about it. And that's not the path to creativity. That's just the opposite path to creativity. The worst enemy of creativity is you thinking about what other people are going to think. And I learned this from another podcast person, guy by the name of Blind Boy. Go check out his podcast. I learned this from him because he basically said you have to put out shit. You basically have to put out shit because, number one, that's the way you learn. And number two, you put out shit and you never know who's going to be attracted to that shit. Your podcast might be awful, but you're going to get people who are going to listen to it just because they know it's going to be awful. So you just have to you have to do something that I really don't like doing. You have to create the podcast around what you like, not around what you think people are going to like. And that's the hard part, because everybody wants to make money. Everybody wants to be successful. Everybody wants something to work. And, it doesn't happen overnight. It just doesn't happen overnight. It takes time and it takes effort. You have to put in the time that it takes to do these kind of things. And, it's honestly, when I start like this, I have no idea what I'm going to talk about. I really don't. And I would really like viewers to tell me, if you listen to this podcast, get in the comments and let me know what you want to hear. To look at what my podcast is based around, and then let me know what path you want to hear. Because I'm open to suggestions. Because I've done a lot of episodes. And those episodes are nice. I went and got scripts and stories around mental illness and everyday things that really make up mental illness. Because mental illness is in everybody. It's just the way that you handle things. The way that you deal with people, the way that you, the way you handle things. And that's mental illness, and if you have it right, you'll kind of be able to skate through that stuff. If you have it wrong, you'll have some issues. And we all do. Nobody's perfect, and I want to say I'm by no means an expert. So I also want to talk about why I started this podcast. I've done a ton of things, probably because my mother was an entrepreneur. So I'm doing a lot of things that she would do. She tried everything. I mean, she tried Herbalife. She tried think she tried, what was that, Amway? She tried just all kinds of stuff, but my mother was not a quitter. And I love that about her. I love that she instilled that in me because, I'm definitely not a quitter. And don't get me wrong, I've tried to quit. You feel me? I've tried to quit. I've actually tried to just say, you know what, screw it, I'm not going to do it. And then the next day I'm sitting around and I'll see something online or something, and then I'll be like, oh, okay, well, let me try that. And I'll take that path. That don't work, I'll quit. The next day I'll see something else and try it. So it's a continuous process that, you have to understand. One thing that I know of is that nobody cares. Nobody cares if you quit. They really don't. You can quit and sit in your house and you'll be in there and they will find you when you expire, still sitting there. Nobody cares. And once you understand that nobody cares, that your whatever destiny that you're trying to get to is up to you. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen, overnight with some people. You do have some people that it does happen overnight, but, apparently I'm not one of them. So, and I'm pretty sure some of the people who listen to this podcast, you're probably not one of them either. So we're all in the same boat. So let's grab an oar and keep rowing. But it doesn't really happen overnight. It really doesn't. And I want to make sure to be honest about this. Even if I won the lottery tomorrow, I would still do this podcast. Even if I won the lottery tomorrow, I would still do this podcast because this podcast is therapy. You just don't know how much I have in my mind all the time. If I think about stuff too long, I'm just pissed off and I'm gonna take it out on somebody. So, and don't get me wrong, I'm not some bully or not some fighter or nothing like that. But, I'll just lose my temper with somebody, who normally I would kind of look past it. But since I was dwelling on something that really pisses me off all day, the only thing that person did when they just, it said something they shouldn't have said, but ordinarily I would have been able to look past it. But in that point in time, they just triggered that anger and I just let it all out on them. Because I don't really, it's not healthy that I don't really say anything. I'm not the type to, to get into the bullying or, if I'm being bullied, I'm going back and forth with the person. I'm the type of person that will just not say anything, and just blow up. And it just all depends on who the person is by me or whatever, and it just depends because it's and it's not healthy. I know it's not healthy. And I already know it's not healthy. But one other thing about it is I also try to, I've been through a lot, right? I've lost a fight, whatever. And to be honest with you, I really don't know if I can fight or not. I really don't know. I honestly don't know. And if you saw me, you would be like, man, he could probably knock somebody out, probably. And I probably could. I don't know. I'm not a fighter because I always think about growth. Growth is number one. That's one thing. And I want anybody who's listening to this to understand that it doesn't matter how much growth it is. As long as you strive to grow and be a better person tomorrow than you were today, thumbs up. as long as you're your biggest cheerleader, when you do something and something happens, as long as you're the one that's cheering the loudest for yourself, thumbs up. Nobody else matters. They really don't. It could be your mother, your dad, your sister, whoever. At the end of the day, you came in this world by yourself and you're going to leave by yourself. Your success is your own path. Nobody else can do anything about that. Unless, of course, you meet what's his name? The guy that it's not Steve Jobs. It's the new guy that owns Apple, and then his wife left. His wife divorced him, and she's trying to get back at him. At least I heard. I'm not sure about that. I'm not going to say she's trying to get back at him because I don't know. It's not my business. But she divorced him, and she's giving away like an average person's fortune. In which, if she happens to listen to this podcast, I could use some support. I really could. I would love for you to sponsor the Narrative Mindset podcast. And I would take it whatever way you wanted me to take it. That's just where I'm at right now. I really don't have time I can't afford to turn much down, but what was I saying? Growth. Growth is the most important. It doesn't matter how small it is. So you have to get out of your own way with that too, as far as growth, because it just doesn't matter. As long as you make some kind of a change, a positive change, then that's growth. If you've been thinking about, your diet like everybody else is, and tomorrow you decide to get on the treadmill, that's growth. So that's what I really want people to understand is that it's, let's root for the small growth. Let's root for the small growth. And I also want people to understand, stop trying to create things for other people, because I see a ton of people, including myself, who everybody hates their voice. And then you got all of these podcasts or YouTube videos, and they're giving you settings after setting after setting, and some of them work. By the way, I keep saying there's a site, Learner to Learner. Great guy, gives Rodecaster Pro settings. Check him out. They're free, and they pretty much work. I'll tell you a secret as to what I did, what I'm trying to see with this episode. I'm trying to see if it's going to work. And basically I turned my compressor down. My compressor is the threshold is like at 55, ratio 30, attack 10, release 6.5, and the gain is all the way up. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to compress my voice to make it so it's softer, and because I listened to my podcast in my car, the episode I posted yesterday. I listened to that in my car, and it sounded really good. It sounded really good. I could actually cut my radio all the way up, and it wasn't distorted or anything like that. So that was definitely a win. So, and also I want to make sure, because my nose is running right now, you might hear me sneeze every now. You might hear me not sneeze, sniffle every now and then. But let me tell you, yesterday I decided I actually took off early today too, because I'm a rideshare driver. So I actually took off early today because it was just. I think it's because of Thanksgiving. Everybody must be on Thanksgiving break or something like that. So it was there were really dead spots out there. I had one trip that was like 17 miles away. So I went, and then the guy was going like 2 miles away. Then I had another trip that was 17 miles away. But I canceled it because their GPS is really wanky. And I'm going down 96, and then it tells me all of a sudden, turn around. So I get off, I turn around, then I look up and the thing is telling me to turn around again. And I was like, you know what, I'm not doing this. Yesterday, I had like a tickle in my throat, and it just got worse overnight. So my Thanksgiving was like horrible. I spent the night, in my throat feeling awful. Today, I got up, I got back in the bed because I said, I'm not doing this. And then I got back out the bed and said, well, I'll try it. Got out, did half a day. It was slow. So I came home. And now you can't hear it, but now my nose is running. And you also might hear me grab my cup of tea here also. I made some lemon tea. Hang on real quick. Yeah, I made some lemon tea because that's kind of, I got to cough real quick. Tea is one of the, I would think it's one of the good things for if you're getting sick, or sick or whatever you want to call it. But I came home today. The only good thing is I don't have the little feeling in my throat, and I'm still, sneezing, and my nose is still running. But what I do, for those of you who want to know, what I do is while I'm doing rideshare, I'm always thinking about my podcast and thinking about what I want to come up with and what I want to say in my episode. So I'm constantly thinking about content. I get home and I make my lunch real quick, and then I do an episode, which right now I'm doing off the top of my head. I'll be reading a short story here that I created on Toolbass here in a minute. But like I said, today I'm starting taking a turn with the podcast. This should be episode, I think it's 78 or 79. I was hoping that I can make it to 100, but it just seems like I ran out of gas with the last idea, and it's like I was on fumes. And then like I said, I'm not a quitter. So I gave up for like 2 days, and then I, got back to it, and I was listening to Blind Boy. I was listening to his very first podcast, and that's where I got my inspiration. And actually, speaking of which, he sounds different in that first podcast. And that's the sound I'm really chasing. I'm chasing that soft, full sound. And I've been really just going round and round and round. No, for those of you who are wondering, no, I'm not British. So I don't want to sound like him. I just want that. Excuse me. I got a snot rag and a cup of tea in front of me. But I want that rich sound. So that's why I've gone through settings over and over and over again, trying to figure it out. But it's like practice makes perfect. So it helps. Oh, by the way, whoever is listening to this, when you go to your master compeller, when you go to, I think home, settings, outputs, and then processing, there's a master compeller. And I guess what that is just another compressor. So basically, at least what I would recommend is set that the same as you would your other compressor. And I think the master compeller is like, the final output compression. So I set mine the same. So what I'm going to do with this podcast, this episode, is I'm going to listen to it in my car when I, go do rideshare tomorrow, and I'll see how it sounds, and then I'll come back in and make, little adjustments if it doesn't sound the way I want it to sound. And I mean, some of you guys could tell me also if you like the sound of the podcast 78. I think it's 77 to 78, the podcast before this one. Let me know if you like that sound better or if you like this podcast sound better. And then that's what I'll go with, because it's all about it's halfway about the listeners, but the content is about the way I want to bring it to you. And that's really important. You don't want to create a podcast or anything based on what somebody else wants you to do. You want to create what you want to create. And for most of us, yes, it's going to be horrible at first. But the thing about being horrible is people actually respect horrible. Even if they come in and leave bad comments or tell you, it doesn't sound good, or they might come by and say, hey, give you pointers. I'm all for everything as long as we do it respectful, because, like I said, I'm all about growing. Anybody who, needs, any information I can give, about my process, then I'm all for it. But I'm going to shut up real quick because I'm kind of running my mouth. And I want to read a short story in this podcast. And I may do that from now on to kind of help build my creativity. Because like I said, I want to basically put out shit. And I want the listeners to see the process and see, the first, couple are bullshit, and then you if you're ambitious, you'll learn. If you're ambitious, you'll learn. If you aren't ambitious, then you won't learn. But if you're ambitious, you'll learn. And I don't know. It's a process. It's a process. But at least for me, the thing about me, I never give up. Ever. Because I can't. I've tried and tried and tried. I may cut this thing off, unplug it. It's like I'm sitting there watching TV, thinking about ways that I can do it better. So that's part of my curiosity and trying to figure things out. Because my mother, when I was growing up, she used to tell everybody that I was curious, but it's a little bit deeper than that. It's curiosity to a point to where I can look back 30 years and see a situation and just wait for the final piece of that puzzle. And when I finally put it together, it's like, oh, okay, I'm good. File it and move on. But at the same time, I can't remember the shit that matters, a fucking exam at school. And who gives a shit about, the bullshit 30 years ago? But that's, the curse that I was born with, to remember bullshit, not the shit that matters. And ain't that something? I mean, that's appreciated, Jesus. But it's yeah, I have a short story that I'll read, and the story is basically about me and my process and the my podcast and that whole journey so far. So I hope you enjoy it. The air in the storage unit I converted into a sound booth always smelled faintly of old carpet and desperation. I closed my heavy door, the dull thud sealing me into the makeshift fortress, a 6 by 8 foot space lined with cheap acoustic foam I spray glued to the drywall myself. This was the headquarters, the adjacent path. My latest, greatest, most terrifying attempt at growth. My name is Gerald Tabb. And if there was one thing you needed to know about Gerald Tabb, it was that I was constantly planning my ascent, regardless of the gravitational pull of the world trying to keep me grounded. I wasn't rich. I was just 40-something, making an honest living in a mid-level management role that offered just enough pay to justify the misery. But I had ambition, thick enough to choke on. I don't want comfort. I want movement. I want to carve out space that was indisputably mine. The ambition I'd realized over the years seemed to be the root of why people hated me. It was strange. The quality of the animosity, it wasn't based on my actions. I was fair, if demanding, but on the simple fact that I refused to stay put. People don't mind being in the hole. They just resent it when you start building a ladder. In the office, I felt the coolness, the intentional silence when I entered the break room. They whispered that I was too much, always scheming, or just looking out for number one. I used to fight it, trying to mitigate the dislike. But it was like trying to patch a sieve. Now, I just accepted it. Their negativity was fuel. My goal wasn't friendship or popularity. My goal was growth, always growth. The podcast was the logical next step. It was the platform for the outsider, the self-starter. I wiped the sweat from my brow, adjusted the condenser mic, and looked at the script for episode 1. The rules of content creation were plastered on a note card above my monitor. Niche down. Solve a very specific problem. Always provide clear takeaway value. I was following them to the letter. Episode 1 was titled The Essential Mindset Shifts for Mid-Career Financial Leveraging. It was tight. It was marketable. It was utterly, painfully dull. I hit the record button. Welcome, listeners, to The Adjacent Path, the podcast dedicated to helping you move from stagnation to elevation. I stopped myself, pulling off the headphones. The playback sounded slick, professional, and empty. It sounded like 1,000 other voices I was trying to compete with. I sat back in the fraying desk chair, the springs groaning in protest. This was the crux of my problem. Every piece of advice, every guru, every YouTube video, every article I devoured, screamed the same warning. Give the audience what they want. Figure out the market gap. Fill the void. Optimize for search. And deliver predictable content. But the real unspoken rule of creativity, the one that makes art resonate, is the opposite. Don't worry about what they want to listen to. Put out what feels good to you. I was trapped between optimization and authenticity. I was using my considerable energy to create a product I thought the market needed, rather than delivering the perspective I possessed. I was trying to be someone else, the polished self-help guru, instead of just Gerald Tabb, the guy who won't quit, even when everyone wants him to fail. I looked at the script again, feeling a deep physical aversion. This wasn't growth. This was limitation. I deleted the file, pushed the script away, and stared at the red recording light. I thought about the hate. I thought about the sheer exhaustion of having to prove my value every single morning. Not through my work, but through my sheer existence. That feeling, the raw, unvarnished struggle, that was a differentiating factor. No marketing strategy could replicate that. I leaned into the mic, ignoring the rules, ignoring the SEO implications. I didn't announce the podcast name. I just let the thoughts spill out. They talk about the hustle culture. I started my voice lower, rougher than before. They talk about waking up early, drinking green juice, and grinding. They make it sound like grit is a commodity you can buy in a nice, well-packaged course. But that's bullshit. Real ambition isn't some glamorous pursuit you share on Instagram. I felt the tightness in my chest ease as I spoke the truth. Real ambition is ugly. I'm sitting here in this suffocating closet in Detroit, knowing that half the people you work with genuinely hope you fail. Real ambition is having 10 failed side ventures, the crypto newsletters, the custom keychains, the social media consulting that went nowhere, and still having the madness to believe that the 11th attempt is the one that sticks. I closed my eyes, letting the energy of my years of struggle pour out. I spent weeks planning this podcast, trying to give you value, trying to give you the perfect 5-step plan. But the only real value I have is this. I refuse to stop. And if you're listening to this, maybe you feel it too. Maybe you're the person in the office everyone silently resents because you're not content to just wait out the clock. Maybe you're perpetually doing too much. My voice cracked slightly. Forgot the rules, forgot the niche. I don't know what direction this podcast is going. I don't know if anyone will listen past this minute. But if you're trying to build something different and the world is pushing back, you have to realize that the most valuable thing you possess is the narrative of your own resonance. Not the curated version, but the raw, messy truth of the fight. I gripped the edge of the desk. Stop trying to anticipate the audience needs. The audience doesn't know what they need until they hear something that resonates with their soul. And the only way to reach their souls is by putting out what you feel is true and urgent to yours. I took a deep breath. The clock on my laptop showed I had spoken for 7.5 minutes. 7.5 minutes of rambling, unedited, unoptimized truth. It had no clean ending, no tidy call to action. I hit stop. I put my headphones back on and listened to the playback. It was imperfect. There were background noises I hadn't filtered, a few stutters, a tone of sheer frustration. But it sounded like Gerald Tabb. It sounded like the ambition that everyone hated. Finally given an honest voice, it sounded like growth, internal and undeniable. I finally understood the lesson I hope my future listeners will catch on to. You can try to optimize everything, your career, your financials, your content. But if you optimize away your integrity, you have nothing left to sell but noise. True growth isn't about conforming to existing paths. It's about hacking your own way through the jungle, equipped with what you genuinely are. I published that episode titled simply The Adjacent Path, Episode 1, The Uselessness of Optimization. The metrics didn't matter yet. I had finally achieved the kind of growth I actually needed, the courage to be seen, imperfections and all. The next episode might fail spectacularly, but for the first time, I was moving forward on my own path. And that was the only validation I needed. Let them hate. I was finally building something true. Thank you for tuning in to the Narrative Mindset Podcast. Comment, download, and hopefully some of you, at least one of you, will stay on this journey with me.